Have you ever wondered why the left backs Hamas and other groups that are utterly at odds with their other conclusions? Like, Hamas is not democratic, they're not socialistic, they're not into gay stuff whatsoever. How are they for them? What is this about? The key to understanding it is really a simple doctrine that informs the foundation of all leftist ideology. And once you understand that this is the starting point, the cornerstone of all of the rest of their ideas, then you will understand how they consistently come to ideologically contradictory conclusions. There's a pretty good article here by the Washington Examiner, Why the Left Can't Think Straight on Hamas. And I really do appreciate the article, so I don't want to drag this author, but he gives an answer that is very unsatisfactory to people who genuinely want an answer to the question. It's not that he's not right, it's that he doesn't go to a sufficient depth to understand it. He says they support them in other backward nations like those in the global south because of their miserable conditions are allegedly due not to their failings, but because of the predation by successful developed democracies. So he's getting super close to understanding it. Here's the three words you have to know. It is Marx's conflict theory. Trying to understand any leftist ideology without understanding Marx is like trying to understand a pit bull without understanding what a dog is. As James Lindsay has perfectly described it, Marx is the genus, and critical theory and radical feminism and critical race theory and queer theory, these are all species of the general genus. Let me just quickly prove it to you. Here's BLM in their own words describing themselves as trained Marxists.
We actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
Or let's go over to queer theory, where the founder, Gail Rubin, says Marxism is probably the most supple and powerful conceptual system extant for analyzing social inequality. Or what about feminism? Simone de Beauvoir, though I butchered that, she declared herself a feminist in 1972 and then immediately joined other Marxist feminists. Or more closely related to this specific topic, how about decolonialism? Is that in any sense? Oh yeah, it is absolutely Marxist. The founder of it was Franz Fanon. He was, guess what, a Marxist humanist, and he had important contributions to Marxism. And he was particularly influential in so-called freedom fighting movements like that in Palestine. And of course, this led to the infamous tweet by one journalist who said, during the attacks of October 7th, she said, "What did y'all think decolonialization meant? Did you think it meant vibes or papers or essays? Losers. When people say not like this," she says, "then like what? LOL." As though the raping of women and the slaughtering of innocent babies and grandparents and festival goers, that's just the way you fight for freedom. That's how you get rid of colonizers, right? But like all children, they have to slowly escape the shadow of their dad. And so all of these leftist movements do just this. They take the skeletal structure that is Marxism, and then they dress it up with a different stupid blue haircut. But make no bones about it, they all still care about emancipation and capital and ideology, and at the root of all of it is Marx's conflict theory. He opens the Communist Manifesto with a summation of this theory. The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles. And then he lists a bunch of them: free man, slave, patrician, plebeian. And he says, in a word, oppressor and oppressed. All society can be understood by the competition between the oppressor and the oppressed. And once you start there and let everything else flow from that starting point, then all of their ideologically inconsistent ideas begin to make a lot more sense. Now, he did develop this in other writings, but this is a really nice sort of summation of it. Conflict theory, first developed by Marx, is a theory that society is in a state of perpetual conflict because of competition for limited resources. Conflict theory holds that social order is maintained by domination and power rather than by consensus and conformity. Notice here, it is reductionistic. We all know that competition, power dynamics, and oppression occur in society, but that's not the only dynamic about society. There's also times where there's consensus. There's also times where there's conformity. But for the leftists, there is extreme cynicism about all of that. For most leftists, the idea that you would form a democracy, this is probably just a reinscription of power, a new form of power dynamics in which you can oppress the lower masses. According to conflict theory, those with wealth and power try to hold on to it by any means possible, chiefly by oppression, by suppressing the poor and the powerless. So when they look into Israel versus Palestine, they see that Israel is on top. Israel is a flourishing society. So they don't hate them. Notice here, it's a little more nuanced. It's not that, oh, Israel is successful. It is the assumption that the only way that you could ever have the edge on someone else is by oppression. And therefore, success is a clear indication of oppression. Now, whenever you zoom out of the Israeli-Palestinian issue and you look at it objectively, you see that Israel has offered no less than 5 times a 2-state solution and has been willing to accept it every time. They have traded land for peace numerous times. The only reason why they own as much land as they do is because they got into 2 major defensive wars and won land in those defensive wars. 20% of Israel is Palestinian, and they've elected over 100 members to their government from the Palestinian cohort. But those are all facts that would change, that would nuance your view of the conflict, right? And therefore, those are facts that they are comfortable ignoring. That is so essential to understand. As soon as you get that conflict theory comes before everything else, this is their worldview, this is the lens through which they see everything else, then that filters out certain facts. Take another example. Take whites and blacks. They assume that America is a white supremacist nation because whites, in terms of group outcomes, are doing better than blacks. Whites have more median income, they have more median wealth, they have higher rates of education, etc. But if you zoom out, what you'll see is that whites are far closer to the median than they are to the top. Asians, Nigerian immigrants, Indians, they're all crushing whites. But while that should change your view of the system being rigged for white people, again, because at the foundation, you're seeing it only through this dynamic, then they have to come up with some explanation for how it is that whites are in the middle, not in the supreme position. And so this is where you get this idea of internalized oppression and white adjacency, that Asians and Nigerian immigrants are acting white, and therefore they're able to succeed in the nation. Now, you have a hard time fully grasping this because you are firmly within what is a critical thinking tradition. This is a paper by a critical theorist herself. This is a far leftist. She says that for the critical thinker, that your tradition is concerned with epistemic adequacy. Let me clarify that kind of large word. You care about whether or not somebody's arguments is faulty, if their argument is faulty, if their assertions lack evidence, if the truth claims appeal to unreliable sources. This is one of my favorites. If the concepts are sloppily crafted and applied. You care deeply if people examine the assumptions or the commitments of their own views. But then she says the critical theorist, and critical theory is just neo-Marxism, okay? She says that they have a different set of assumptions. They begin thinking about the world and they begin thinking about truth, not with logic, intellectual consistency at the forefront. For you, if you realize that two of your ideas contradict each other, well, then one of them has to be wrong and they're both wrong. They don't care about that. Their assumption is not logical consistency, but rather, it says here, the critical learner, that's just somebody learning to be a theorist, is someone who is empowered and motivated to seek justice and emancipation. Emancipation is taking those at the bottom and making them equal to those at the top. Therefore, if those pesky hate facts get in the way and there's some explanation other than oppression that would explain why Israel has a flourishing society and why Palestine is a squalid hellhole run by authoritarian monsters, if there's anything other than oppression that explains that, like personal decision-making or the role of Islamic extremism in the formation of that society, no, we can't even consider that. The only possible option is oppression. And therefore, they will ignore all the facts, all the evidence, and they only go with what fits the theory because that's at the foundation of their world. And that also helps you understand how they can criticize oppression, but elevate Che Guevara and the USSR. It helps you understand how they come to illogical conclusions because they don't care about logic. They say it in their own writings. They only care about lifting up those they consider to be oppressed. That's it. That's it for today. This is Unsafe Media. Please consider joining the Patreon. If you haven't yet, you're probably also the kind of person who doesn't realize that Frozen is literally just one giant exercise in moral nihilism. Go read the words to the song Let It Go, then comment below what I'm talking about. Then join the Patreon, like, share, subscribe. That really helps out with the algorithm to help me get this message out to more people. Until next time, I'm reminding you, trust in God and keep your powder dry.